Hi, welcome to today's Stop Online ID Checks live stream. I'm Gibran Ludwig, Fight for the Future's policy strategist, and I'll be moderating today's panel. I'm very excited to be joined by our three panelists. We have Maya Laflamme, co-executive director of GSA Network, Paige Collings, senior speech and privacy activist at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and Tristan Penn, director of equity and accountability at NTEN. Governments around the world have been grappling with how to hold big tech companies accountable while addressing concerns about children's online safety. Age verification mandates have taken center stage in these debates. The UK Online Safety Act, or UCOSA, came into force this summer, and this week Australia will begin enforcement of their social media ban for people under 16. Online ID check mandates have directly or implicitly targeted LGBTQ content through broad requirements to age gate material that is harmful to minors or sexual in nature. These restrictions have proven harmful to LGBTQ children who often need online community and support to thrive. As we speak, the US Congress is considering a long list of bills that would require age verification or censor content important to communities already subject to oppressive right wing governments. Age verification is invasive and insecure. It incentivizes companies to collect even more information from all of us and has enormous potential for censorship. Right here, we have a panel of folks who work on these issues, and we will be discussing why this is important to us and describe how we can fight back against these bills. So, first of all of you do very different work, but are here to talk about how age verification will impact the internet in your communities. Can you describe why you and your org are invested in this work and how it will impact the communities you work with? I'm just going to start with Maya.
Hi, y'all. My name is Maya Laflamme. I'm the co-director at GSA Network. I'm on Wyandotte land in Detroit, Michigan, and my pronouns are she, her. So as GSA Network, our core belief is that trans, queer, and two-spirit young people exist, belong, and have a right to self-determination. All three of those things are crucial when it comes to what we're looking at the legislative landscape. Because we organize with youth, every single time there is a legislative initiative, it affects young people. Young people are an invisibilized class that is and should be building power around laws that affect them. Our main understanding and the work that we are trying to do is to be able to, with young people, build a world where they are experiencing dignity in choicefulness and also have spaces to gather. So when we think about the internet, especially for queer and trans youth, we think about that as a prime and ripe gathering place to get important life-changing information.
Thank you so much, Maya. And can I move to Tristan now?
Yeah, sure. Hey everyone. My name is Tristan Penn. I use he, him pronouns. I'm Navajo and I am the Equity and Accountability Director for N10.org. And our work is a capacity building organization across mainly across North America, but truly around the world, in making sure that community-based organizations, B Corps, and nonprofits have the tools and tech tools specifically that they need, as well as not only the tools that they need, but the tools that aren't going to be extractive, they aren't going to be unequitable, and they are going to be used efficiently for whatever size organization or whatever type of work that you're doing for the good of the community. So that is where we sit, and we're an organization that prioritizes equity and liberation, and wanting to make sure that all marginalized communities, and specifically Maya uplifted the LGBTQIS plus community that is truly probably the the saddest beneficiary of these types of legislation and laws, which is just really really important to uplift, and not even uplift, but like push forward this discussion right now. So I'm happy to be here alongside Maya and Paige as well.
Thank you so much, Tristan. And Paige, on to you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Joanne. So my name is Paige Collings. I'm Senior Speech and Privacy Activist at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. EFF is a nonprofit organization, a law firm based in San Francisco, working on digital civil liberties and digital rights. And I myself, I'm based in Europe, from the UK, so really working on kind of the global framing of age verification or age assurance mandates. And I think what we've been seeing is this stretch, this transcontinental commitment to a very well-intentioned purpose. I think Maya and Tristan have both mentioned that there are kind of issues with being online, but indeed the way to solve those is not to restrict the rights of children, and indeed through that all people online. The internet must remain a place where all voices can be heard, free from any discrimination or censorship or surveillance by any authorities, but specifically government agencies and government authorities. And so I think what EFF we're really trying to push when we're thinking, Gibran, you mentioned the UK's COSA, but when we talk about the US's the multitude of both federal and state-based, state-level age verification or age assurance mandates, and then we look at what's happening in the UK, Australia, Canada, France. There's just such a multitude of legislations and initiatives trying to both protect children. And I think what we're trying to say is this is not the way to do that. Indeed, this is actually probably the opposite way to protect children and indeed everybody else. It's not only going to impact younger people and those under the age of 18, which are those that these legislations and commitments are trying to protect, but indeed everybody's going to be harmed by this. And so at EFF, we're really trying to push that narrative that there are better ways to protect younger people, both online and how that also, most importantly, pertains to their lives offline too. I think young people, we try and kind of maybe perceive them as a vacuum of, as Maya was touched upon at the beginning, without any agency or without their own, desires or to engage with anything. And indeed, what we're trying to do is prove the opposite. And so, yeah, great to be here, and thank you so much for everyone for joining as well.
Thank you, Paige, and really thank you all again for being here with us. I'm going to start out by asking a specific question to each panelist, and then we're going to go into some, broader questions that everyone is going to have a chance to take a go at. So, Paige, starting with you, you saw firsthand how UCOSA was ushered in and how enforcement is played out. What were some of your biggest takeaways, and how did UK internet users react?
Yeah, so to take, I think, the second question first, people in the UK reacted relatively poorly to this piece of legislation. I think to take it back to the very beginning and not to monologue about the UK, but essentially this piece of legislation, the Online Safety Act, started out as a white paper in the UK in 2017. And so we saw a very protracted legislative process, starting out as very well intentioned to try and protect younger people online, and just kind of snowballed into this behemoth of a bill. It was more than 262 pages long, trying to solve all the problems of and harms of online. The goal was to make the UK the safest place in the world to go online. And so in doing so, kind of swept up women's rights online, LGBTQ rights online, children's rights online. And these are kind of verbatim the subject areas that the piece of legislation sought to achieve. And actually, what happened in the end is what we've seen, and especially since July this year, when the age verification, or specifically age assurance mandate came into effect, is that the legislation itself was not compatible with kind of human rights frameworks, and the rollout was not effective in protecting younger people online. People in the UK signed petitions, they downloaded VPNs, they were very vocal in their commitment to not wanting to participate in such a surveillance infrastructure. I think what we saw very quickly is that people in the UK were very pertinently aware of what was happening here, which was that the multitude of different ways people could verify their identities. It went beyond kind of the framing that we see often in the US, which is biometric surveillance, vis-a-vis passport or identity card or driver's license. And instead, what shifted was a look kind of a laundry list of ways that people could verify their identities. And so that included email address, connecting to your banking, connecting to your utility bills. And so there were lots of different ways that people were able to kind of connect and verify that they were over the age of 18. But both on a technical level and kind of a pragmatic level, it just didn't seem to work in any regard. And we know why. I think everybody, fellow colleagues and panelists right now, we all know that this is not the way to protect younger people online. What it does is let people slip through and content slip through whilst at the same time seeing an overzealous content moderation of pro-LGBTQ, pro-Palestinian content, pro content that might depict state authorities like law enforcement and the police in precarious situations. And so we know in the first few days that was the kind of content that was swept behind the age gate. And so that became very difficult to obtain without either it was removed immediately or it was behind the age gate. And so you had to prove that you were over the age of 18 to see that. And in all these scenarios, this wouldn't typically fall under that as unsuitable for younger people. But as we've seen in many different states in the US, this is in exactly the content that we are seeing getting swept behind. I think a relatively good faith reading of that would be the cost of compliance is so high for companies, especially in the UK. The cost of non-compliance goes beyond financial penalties, but it can also, at the very extent, include jail time for senior managers of companies. And so there is kind of this incentive to over commit to the moderation of content to ensure that any content on that platform is not available for, and the quote is that's harmful to children. And there are also different ways to go through that. And I know we're tight on time, so I won't go into the minutiae of what that does include. But what we know is that there's not so much nuance in the moderation of this. There's not so much nuance in the execution of and the operationalization of this piece of legislation. And so what we have seen is a very chaotic and very messy rollout of this piece of legislation, content that should have been perhaps age-gated vis-a-vis the parameters of the bill was not. Pro-LGBTQ, pro-Palestinian, as I mentioned, was blocked on lots of different platforms. It almost gave certain companies an opportunity to throw content that they didn't want on their platforms behind an age gate, because that was perhaps then it restricts the access to a lot of users. And then finally, I think what we have seen is this global perspective of and this acknowledgement, and I'm sure Maya and Tristan will talk much more about this, but an acknowledgement that content that's been hosted in the UK that people around the world might be accessing through VPN or through different methods. Once it's not being hosted in the UK, it's no longer available, not just to users in the UK, but to users elsewhere that have been relying on that, and in places where homosexuality is criminalized, in places where certain trans-affirming care or gender-affirming care is, again, it's not available online, or it isn't. Of course, it's criminalized in so many different places as well. Once you start to remove that from platforms at the infrastructure level, it no longer is unavailable to those people in the locality and the jurisdiction, but for everybody else around the world that might rely on that through a VPN. And so I think there's also this acknowledgement that's happened and that shifted in the UK, that both we don't want to be providing my email address so I can communicate on Reddit. That, lots of different Reddit forums were requiring that. I don't want to verify my ID to go on a forum or a server, or to communicate with my friends, or to find this really valuable information. And most importantly, what I don't want to do is give the state or give companies my most private information, because in all of these scenarios, there is no rationale that it is protecting younger people, but there is evidence over and over again that it is harming wider society, and it's buying into this wider surveillance infrastructure and the surveillance system, both that corporations and governments are running and driving forward. And so I think that's probably some of the main lessons. I can talk about this piece of legislation for a long, long time and the rollout, but I think kind of top line is that it was very messy. People weren't happy, and I think it was a good reminder of how a country like the UK, that kind of prides itself on, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is the place where it will be the safest for people to go online, especially children. That's just not true, and we can be clear of that now.
Thank you, Paige. Yeah, I think you touched on a lot of the core themes that we're going to be going back to on this panel, of like privacy and censorship. I'm going to turn to Maya now. You work with young LGBTQ people and have organized with communities in the South. How would online censorship and age verification mandates impact these communities? How do the young people you work with use social media to connect with each other?
hmm Yeah, so what organizing in the South and organizing with young people have in common is that we're organizing against this thread of isolation, and really trying to break isolation within the broader community. Um, it's interesting because connection connection generally with young people is fraught based on our cultural understanding of who young people are and how they are able to interact in the world. And because we see young people as fully formed, dignified human beings, we are it's we really understand these types of censorship bans as a form of condescension or a form of yeah, just like not fully understanding. It like really comes from a lack of understanding personhood and when people become people. One thing that we really think about a lot as adult allies that work with young people is the work of connecting to what we know as of ourselves as younger selves. Not the imagine yourself as a young person and not the person that people said you were, that your parents like said how you acted, but the remembering of the core you and knowing that that core you existed with a wide range of wisdom and programming, the same type of programming we're talking about here in like the internet. We our bodies come with a programming, and we test that programming through the stewardship and the support of adults and people that have and elders. And so when young people do not have an opportunity to have those places to test their human programming and to build up who they are as a human being, you end up uh, putting a whole community, a whole generation at a deep deficit. So when we think about making laws that impact young people to keep them safe without having young people involved in understanding what types of things they need to keep them safe and what types of tools, guardrails, and stewardship that they would like, you're really moving from a place of condescension. Um, and I one thing that I've been thinking about a lot is that when it comes to age restrictions on access to things, there is often not age restrictions for adults to be able to enter youth spaces. And if folks are have this fear of adults coming in and secretly indoctrinating their children, um, it is more we hold young people more with dignity by allowing and creating space for them to convene themselves. So much of what we do with GSA Network is about gathering. So GSA Network, if you know of them, they're GSA clubs in schools. Gay Straight Alliance is what it used to be called. Now it's Genders and Sexualities Alliance. And so our main focus is making sure young people can gather, can connect with one another. And that is kind of how we think about the internet as well as this kind of like democratic utopia where folks can like go in and connect and find out information that they wouldn't know before and learn from one another. That's a beautiful way that we see young people and all people really interacting with social media and the internet. However, when we start bringing in uh, these types of censorship, you are sacrificing closeness, the lessons you learn from closeness, for a false sense of security. And what we understand is that safety is not equivalent to surveillance just because we have not been able to expand how we are in relationship with young people. We've completely infantilized an entire population and decided that the only way to protect them is to keep them out. And we know if you have kids, I have a 3-year-old. If you have kids, you know if you're like really trying to be a decent parent in this day and age, you're really trying to find the balance between showing and telling and experimenting and trying things out. This is the dance of parenthood. And we have to really understand that young people deserve spaciousness. And just because we have not figured out the formula in our legislative practices and our ways of governance has completely stripped away the dignity of like human knowledge of what we know coming into this earth, even as infants, just that this knowledge that's stored in our bodies. We have this is a piece around like why we talk about decolonizing an education and decolonizing how we think about things, because our legislation, our ways that we govern um, things like the internet could look really different if we decolonize the way we think of young people. And um, yeah, and I think the last thing I wanted to say is that our work is always about connection. We believe that that is how you grow. Young people go to the internet. Young people are existing. We are all existing to like get information and share information. And when when those resources cannot be accessed, we are building in greater isolation. And when you are there's this thing that keeps being on my mind around like when you're not able to say your complaints out loud, you cannot then understand the underbelly of what that discomfort actually is. And when you don't understand what the underbelly of your discomfort is, then you can't connect with people that can then mirror that back to you. And if you don't have a mirror, then you then do not have a community to act with. So it is an intentional effort, in my view, to disconnect young people. Our work is connection in any form of governance that is about disconnection. Connection is an issue. And what I really want to say, and I'll be quiet now, is that if young people would not have to go to the internet or any other resource if they were getting a comprehensive education in their schools and their communities. Folks are looking to see themselves, their histories, and their understanding of self. So a decolonized education is crucial because folks are getting that on the internet. And so if you are actually afraid and you want more control over what young people have access to, one, bring young people in and get an understanding of what they are actually looking for, and let's bolster our how we educate, the types of things we educate our people on.
Thank you so much, Maya. That was really thoughtful, and I really appreciate how you touched on so many different aspects of this problem and how moving forward is in large part a matter of reframing this question. That it's what safety means is something that's just it's not addressed by this kind of legislation at all. Thank you. Um, so I now have a question for Tristan, and I'm sorry, I realize I pronounced your organization's name incorrectly last time. N10 has a commitment to advancing equity and using technology for movement work. We're often told that censorship or age verification is the only way forward when it comes to holding big tech accountable. What other options do you think lawmakers are ignoring? What is currently missing from this conversation, and what do we need from tech regulation?
Yeah. Oh wow, what a question. And like also like just before I get into it, like I mean, I was going to church with Maya too. I was with it. I loved it. Like and you as well, Paige. It's like I'm just so like honored to be in this like discussion and dialogue, and this is something that is very near and dear to my own heart, and I'm sure all of our hearts. So I think a few things that are missing and the things that like I guess scare me about censorship and you know I'm an anecdotal person and also I love to tell a story too, so walk with me for a moment when we talk about, down memory lane. And I know maybe Paige, I don't know, I've been with N10 for 7 years, but Paige at EFF, when I first came on in like 2018, 2019, there was save.org. And that was a big monumental moment for not only myself, just in my own learning about like the internet landscape of how it all works, how it all looks, sounds, and feels. But just like I thought I was radical then, and I was even more radicalized. So, and I'll briefly, I'm not doing Save.org justice by like condensing it down to the Cliffs Notes. But what I will say is that there was a private equity firm that had wanted to essentially buy the .org domain, and that was, I think, on the doorstep of an election year here. And what we found was that that private equity firm had just been, sprouted out of nowhere. Oh, by a bunch of conservative donors. And that was scary for me. And again, that was one of those things that, what are the implications of that? And it was all like, oh, it's gonna be fine. It's gonna be completely how it was. And there's a lot of other mechanisms that went on to it and a lot of other layers, but just the top layer was that the potential of censorship at the doorstep of an election across a country that was, a very consequential election, was scary. And so that meant that like if that private equity firm was owning the .org and no longer a publicly owned domain, that they could throttle traffic to any website that had the .org domain. Oh, I don't know, rockthevote.org. Oh, I don't know, get out the vote. Any of those things, or like, Planned Parenthood, like all of those things. And that was scary for me. And so that was like the base coat for me for understanding how censorship is being very, very meticulously and very sinisterly um, trying to be worked through the internet. And the internet is such a vast and wide tool, resource place for all of us. And I just thought about the implications of that. And everything felt very heightened in 2019 and 2020, as we all can imagine, um, or don't want to imagine or recall. But I think about that in terms of censorship and just how like, just where my mind went in that moment. And I think about that currently now for the same reasons. And also, I I've worked in nonprofit for 21 years, and 14 of those were in youth development organizations, primarily boys and girls clubs. And it's how I formed, my thought and regard and respect for young people, working with young people. And it's something that I think about constantly. I myself don't have any children, but it feels like, I mean, Lord, I feel old now. I'm 40, but like the kids I worked with when I first started, they're like 25. And like it's a lot. And so I think, and I still worry and think about those kids from time to time, but that is like they are now young adults in this world. And, the subsequent kids that I worked with are now kids that are, entering into the world, have never known a world without the internet. And I am scared for them and worry about those young folks, now young adults, um, because of things like this that we have to have discussion about. One thing that does, I want to answer a question that you did ask in this of what could be done too. And I think a few things come to mind. And again, I'm going to harken back um, to my time at Boys and Girls Clubs. Was I remember very early on there was and this isn't a plug for Boys and Girls Clubs. That's just where I worked. So to be clear, so um, but they had a program that we implemented, and it was a national program that all the clubs would, implement in their own way, shape, or form. It was called NetSmarts, and did it have its problems? Absolutely. Did it have its like clunkiness? Absolutely. But at the core of it, it was teaching internet safety and what kids could do in terms of like education and resources, and what were the basics if you were going to enter into this space that is like so vast and wonderful, but also scary, and rightfully so. If you're going to enter into this space, how can you do so as a good netizen? Um, and it had all these cute words and everything too. So it was packaged for kids, but it was, don't meet people offline. Don't give your personal information. Um, be cautious, be leery. What you see is what you get when you enter into these spaces. And I really loved the heart of that program. And I see that in a lot of different ways in how I'm doing the work, how N10's doing the work, how I'm working alongside our CEO, Amy Sample Ward, in making sure that people have the not only the right tools, but they're entering into it with a heavy sense of regard for and also just a dollop of fear to be like, this is a very powerful tool, and if I use it incorrectly, it could hurt someone. So I say all of that to say that like there needs to be a more focused point of education for bringing our young people. And I really loved what Maya said in terms of honoring their dignity and not even honoring it, but like seeing it as equivalent in your own personal dignity as like a 40-year-old, that they have so much to bring into the world. And so it's incumbent upon us as folks who are a bit older to be able to provide resources and education for those young people to know, okay, cool. We as the millennials came in and we really cut our teeth on the internet, and here are the lessons we learned, and here is the safety that we would like to impart upon you in a really focused way. And I think that is, you know, I know people want immediate reaction. They want immediate action on any of those things. And I think that sometimes, oftentimes, gets the best of us as a society is and to Maya's earlier point, we need to decolonize our way to time and our connection to time too. We are in control of this, and I would rather, I'm also half black too. So like I got like my dad would always say measure twice, cut once. And so that was like always something that sticks with me is I would rather go slower and do it smartly than go quicker and do it ham-handedly. And that's something that like I think about in terms of providing the resources to our young people to be able to regard the internet in the way that it should be without these um, age verification laws that are pushed through ham-handedly and quickly, so that we're kind of caught on our heels, as Paige was saying earlier, where you're like, whoa, this is like this rollout isn't what we thought it was, and now all of these like surprise, surprise, marginalized groups are also getting swept up into it, and we've just walled out really important people in our community, in our societies, in our own families, um, to a resource and a space of information. We've done it in with good intention, but we've done it to our own detriment and to our children's own detriment. So I think education is always where I start in terms of providing um, alternative ways of you know, educating folks. But I do think that's really where I sit. That's the youth development in me. That's the child psych in me. I have to start there. It's easier to build stronger kids than it is to like try and mend a broken internet.
Thank you so much, Tristan. We at Fight, we did a live stream yesterday of the kids' online safety hearing, and one of the viewers was a recent high school graduate and brought up the fact that there were like no computer labs classes anymore in their high school. And so it does seem like there's a big policy gap here just on a very basic level of like I've certainly met people. I'm like 28, so I'm like an elder Zoomer, very young millennial. I've met a number of people in their early 20s who don't have experience with like file hierarchies, which is kind of shocking to me. It seems that they're used to apps on computers, and it's like, yeah, these are things that skills that will help you navigate these systems. That is unfortunately lacking. Yeah, so in the interest of time, I think I've got one more question for everybody, and I'm going to have you all answer as if you were speaking to someone literally in an elevator. So the question here is, what would you say to the average person who might come across an age verification proposal and think it seems like common sense? What might they not be understanding about age verification? And what would you say to them if you're trapped in an elevator with them? And I'm gonna start with Paige and go through my interest in.
Gibran, that's a very difficult one to answer without us positioning ourselves, whether this person is a parent or a teacher, because I think just to touch upon the incredible interventions that Maya and Tristan have said so far, and elucidated on, is that the generation of young people right now that are online, we have given them, the adults in the room have given them unlimited amounts of access to technology in the online space with very little guardrails. And now I think the ramifications of that are really showing, and that's now leading to a lot of panic. And I think, again, as Maya and Tristan have mentioned, it's really well-meaning panic. I think people are really afraid of what's happening in the online space. There's so many bullying, harassment, the really like offline consequences of what's happening in the online realm, and kind of that dynamic and the balance between how we get this right and move forward. But to touch upon what Tristan kind of concluded on is that this doesn't mean that we need to panic, rush ourselves into something that's going to cause more harm, both for the young people that we're trying to assist in these pieces of legislation and these initiatives, and also for all users of the online space. We're not just talking about young people here, we're talking about everybody. And so I think, firstly, what I would say is thank you for engaging on this issue, because it's really important that we have more conversations about age verification, age assurance, and pieces of legislation and initiatives that do seem quite far away from what's happening. I would position that in acknowledging that I think we can all accept that younger people require anonymity. That's why we have helplines that are available for young people around the world that are anonymous, that will provide counseling and self-help and any kind of communication that younger people require. And so if we can accept that in the offline world, younger people might be experiencing harms that they would need to report, that they would need to find assistance from if they're unfortunately experiencing any suicidal or self-harm ideations, if they're being bullied, we can accept that one of the remedies to getting through that is not just blocking all of these servers, but it's providing more assistance and more conversations. I think Maya and Tristan have mentioned this so wonderfully, is that what we don't want to do is cut young people off from vital lifelines. We want to encourage them and build wonderful, safe, and encouraging spaces for people to report their issues. And so unfortunately, this I would have to say, and I know it's not helpful, this is not an easy fix. It doesn't have an easy solution. And policymakers, a good faith reading would be that they're panicked and they see this as a good fix. A relatively bad faith reading would be that they're too lazy to explore comprehensive, holistic alternatives. This needs a structural reconfiguration of how we engage with younger people. As Maya so succinctly put it, we need to decolonize the way that we're engaging with younger people in this world. And so what that means is we need to do more. As the adults in the room, we need to do more. We can't just pivot to a piece of legislation that's going to slap a ban on children accessing the internet or put a ban on people accessing certain things, because firstly, we know that's not going to prohibit people accessing the information that we're trying to ban. We know that the internet has, of course, expanded the reach that people can obtain, for example, pornographic content or any kind of content that kind of gets swept up in these conversations. But young people will still access that, and also they will still be experiencing harms. And so to conclude the elevator, because I think we're probably at like 10th floor here. Like, I don't know, this is a US building, like this is a skyscraper. Maybe we're already 20, 30 floors up. I would just say we have to do more. As the adults in the room, we have to do more. There are holistic structural approaches that we need to be taking. We need to encourage policymakers to talk to the experts, to talk to people like Maya and Tristan, and organizations like my own, where I'm working at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. We're coming from so many different perspectives: the digital rights, children's rights, young people, working with young people in their most affirmed agency forward approach to ensure that they're not just ostracized from the online space, but that they're at the front and center of these conversations, that we're making sure that we're giving younger people and all internet users the maximum capacity. And so I would conclude by telling them to follow the organizations that we're working for, follow the grassroots, wonderful movement-led initiatives that are prioritizing younger people and all users of the internet front and center. And I would tell them that I will follow up with any specific questions that they may have on what their concerns are, if they're a parent, if they're a teacher, if they have nieces and nephews, if they just care about digital rights, that we have a lot of kind of more specific, tailored things that we can communicate. But yeah, unfortunately, there's not an elevator pitch for this, because it's not an easy fix. As much as kind of policymakers might want to force us into that space, it's not. I think it's really important that we continually push ourselves back and examine the infrastructure of recommender systems that are pushing this content to children, the ecosystem that are encouraging children to go on, or younger people, sorry, to go online and find information about LGBTQ rights, younger people to find information about gender affirming healthcare because that's not safe online, offline. And so I think it just requires a much broader reconfiguration of where we're positioning younger people in our societies and how we can ensure that both younger people and adults are both available and safe to engage in the online space. Sorry, that was
Thank
we're at like 200 floors. I'm so sorry, Jabran.
no,
That was
no, thank you.
a big building.
I appreciate your rejection of the framing. I completely agree that these cannot be, these are very complicated issues, right? People are coming here with real concerns, and there are real tragedies that are backing up a lot of these pushes. And these aren't things that we can address in an elevator. It's more the tyranny of our own schedule today that but I really appreciate you pushing back and stuff. Now, if Maya and Penn, you want to or Tristan, you want to very quickly uh travel a smaller elevator.
Yes, okay. I will go quickly and I will just say that whoever I'm speaking with, I would ask them to consider a couple of postures when looking at this information. The first thing is um, spending time understanding what the adult's role is in sense making of the world and figuring out the ways in which you, and now I'm talking to a parent, in which you have are supporting your young person that you obviously love and care about very much, help them with the practice of sense making of what they're seeing and what they're experiencing on the internet and outside of the internet. These are the types of skills that all people, but especially when you're young, you need somebody supporting you through making sense of things, not making decisions for you, but making sense of the things that are happening around you and seeing where your choice lies in that. That also applies to just like common sense building. What are the types of things, what are types of resources you can give your young people to start building up common sense? What are types of things that you should be consuming for yourself to build up a type of common sense that allows you to stay connected to community and to other people, um, without scaring your own self from the lack of knowledge? The other piece is I would really encourage folks to respect the tools that we have in this world, including the internet. The internet is a tool, and we have to be able to be more careful, full of care around how we interact with everything that we are given, because this didn't just come out of nowhere. There is a responsibility on us to not move at we don't need to move at the pace of the internet. Learning and development does not happen overnight, and it doesn't happen through legislation. It happens in community and in relationship. And so we have the responsibility of stewardship, um, of young people, even if we're scared. Um, and the last thing I would say is that, I said that the core belief of GSA Network is that trans, queer, two-spirit young people exist, belong, and have a right to self-determination. But I just want to say that trans, queer, two-spirit people exist. That's one of the first things we say. And they are going to exist whether or not they have the internet, or whether or not they see a blog, or whether or not they've seen a trans person in their life. We know that to be true because we ourselves as adults, trans, queer, non-binary, like we didn't hit 18 and suddenly decide. Okay, most of us, I don't know. But we have an understanding. This is what I mean about going back to the you that you know and not the you that you were told to be. And I'm not saying reject your community's opinions and ways of being around you. I'm saying have a general sense, again, this thing of sense making about the self, And I think if we did that, more people that are afraid of what will happen if their young people have access to trans and queer information, I think they would feel less scared if they had an understanding that like young people have an intelligence about them in the same way we all do, and that they were once a young person and they can access that intelligence as well.
Thank you so much, Maya. I wanted to piggyback on that briefly. I grew up in an eco village, and I think one of the lessons I learned from that experience is that all adults, whether they acknowledge it or not, are involved in raising children. You know, they're going to interact with kids, and they share in this collective responsibility. And so I think, what you're saying certainly, maybe speaks most directly to parents, but I think it's a really good thing for all of us to think about that we really all share in this together, whether we have kids or not. And the age segregating our spaces kind of abrogates us of some of those responsibilities in a way that I think is harmful to everybody. And it would be better if, kids get more diverse adult figures in their life. Yeah, thank you so much. And now, Tristan, for your elevator.
Yeah, well, oh gosh. It's hard to follow up two like phenomenal like elevator pitches like that too. Um, but I think one thing I will say is that, whoever is in this elevator, that, similar to what Maya was saying of, it's important for us to hold the internet with such a high amount of respect, regard, similar to what you would use a very dangerous tool, a knife, a gun. You have to like you regard those with so much just like reverence and a bit of like fear to make sure that you're understanding wholly what you're dealing with. And to that, I would say when you start to, to continue with the analogy, um, throw out the user's manual for like whatever tool that is dangerous or tear out pages because it's scary. Um, it starts to really degrade the usage of that tool. Now, I don't think a kitchen knife would ever come with a user's manual, but I think it could benefit from one, just for people who really need to see it on paper. But I do think, that's the analogy that sticks with me is, it's a dangerous thing. And also, I don't think tearing out pages or keeping them behind a closed, locked room with, places that only certain people can get into to make sure is the right way to do it. I firmly believe in similar to what Maya and Paige have been saying, um, the belief that when you start to trim away and hold things back from kids, you cease to give them a more fully rounded worldview of the world in which they will be here longer than we all will. And so you're not only doing, the future world disservice, but you are doing your immediate, following generation a disservice when you start to institute laws and legislation around what ages can see these things and what ages can't. I'm not saying that it should be a wild west of things. Again, this intention is like rooted, I would hope, in good, but it's really done in a way that is not benefiting the future of the world and the future of the internet. And um, I don't know. It's something that I always think about too. I have a niece and three nephews, and I think about the world and the internet, and they've never known a world without it. And I, as a 40-year-old millennial, definitely remember a world before the internet. And I definitely remember a world where we were playing those green screen, computers in elementary school. So it's something that I want to make sure that, as just an elder within my own extended family, I'm able to impart the lessons of what I've learned upon them and also educate them to make sure that they are well aware of how to use this tool and how they can grow within it. And I think, you know, having having young people be a part of this discourse is crucial. It's important. And, to harken back to what Maya was saying, we can't exclude them. They are a wealth of knowledge. I think, again, I love a good folksy saying, but like from the mouths of babes, when sometimes a kid says something so profound, like there's always like someone a bit older that's like, man, from the mouths of babes. And I want to just highlight that I think they should be an equal and equivalent part of how they are being of how this legislation looks, sounds, and feels, and not just for the sake of being like, the voice of the children. Okay, we're still going to do this. It needs to be in a way that is, that keeps not even keeps their dignity, uplifts their dignity. Um, and so I that's like, just kind of my like pieces of like all the great things that like, Paige and Maya have said, and I'm just trying to like spackle on the side of like what what they've said, which is just amazing and brilliant. But that's yeah, that's really what I would say. I hope it made sense.
Thank you, Tristan. I appreciate it. The analogy of the internet as a power tool makes me think of like the internet's like a lathe. You absolutely have to respect it, but it's a very powerful tool. The other thing you said there about how, you don't want a Wild West, I think it's worth being maybe explicit here that like what we're really opposed to on at least from our perspective, like as an organ, mandates that when the government is saying every website that meets this classification of content must age restrict, that stops us from having these thoughtful conversations. It stops websites from thinking about, well, what actually should fit into that. It puts everyone in this mindset of we just need to avoid liability. We need to avoid doing anything, allowing anything on our website that could potentially get us in trouble. And so it leads to thoughtlessness. And in that, groups who are otherwise marginalized in society are going to be the most impacted by things like that. If LGBTQ content is even vaguely possibly fitting under that definition, it's going to get hit really hard. So yeah, thank you all so much for participating today. And I also wanted to thank the people behind the scenes who made this possible. Uh, Sarah Phillips, who really organized this whole week of action for Fight, Layla, who organized this panel. I really just jumped in to moderate. And to China and Meredith for fixing like the technical side of this, and Alex and everyone else on the team who promoted this. So yeah, thank you all so much, and thank you to anyone who sat with us for this conversation. I really appreciate that we're able to cover such a breadth of thoughtfulness here, because really I think a lot of what we want is more of that, more thoughtfulness, and to approach these conversations with the respect that they deserve, rather than to try to end them by just saying, get all the kids off the internet. Anyway, thank you all so much, and hope to see you all again.
You.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I think we're going to go off live. Okay, great. Now I think Layla's going to hop back on.
Yes. Hi, guys. We have ended the live. I will end